I'm a director in Arup. We're a global engineering and consulting firm. We've got about 11,000 people now. I'm leading our, what we call a digital services business. And as part of that, I'm in our cities team, where I lead our smart cities work globally. Now, that's the most unfortunate title I think you can have to a degree, because currently it means everything and nothing to people who want to know about cities. It's probably more fortunate than being the global lead for dumb cities, which we currently had no voters for. But we set out about 6 years ago to define this a bit more and to think about what we mean by a smart city. So I will talk you through two new tools or two new approaches or frameworks that cities are now using to deal with the challenges that is in front of them. But before I do that, I want to give a bit of context. I think all of us have seen now in the papers the globalization, the urbanization, the cessation of everything that is all happening in cities. I think there's a consensus emerging that we're not seeing the death of distance through telecommunications, where people will move back into the countryside, and that instead the consolidation of cities as economic and social hubs is continuing. So the city, for us as Arup, is one of the focal thought pieces around how we organize everything we do in the firm. But some things have to change. And at the heart of that, I think, is the debate about what is a livable city in the future, what makes a city livable in the future. But what does it actually mean? I'll give you some examples as I go through this. But before I go into the examples, the notion of change I try to show with this picture, and the idea that we could just sit where we are right now is definitely coming to an end. So the requirement to innovate in cities, both around how we develop the physical city and how we manage and operate and use our city, will require radical rethinking. If you are a UK city right now with the budget constraints that they will have, while having an increase in population in pretty much all UK cities, London is expecting an extra 1 million people moving in, will mean something will have to change. We'll not be able to design and operate the city in the same way we're running it today. But what is different from normal business strategies is that here the judgment of a successful, different or future city will be the citizen, who is not an employee, who is not somebody who follows rules, who is probably creating the garbage and the chaos that was presented before quite happily by fulfilling their right as being the voter who actually elects a mayor or who elects leadership in most cities, or if it's not a democratic system, who might choose to move from one city to the next. So we're dealing with an end customer, an end user, who will exercise their own free choice. For the UK specifically, there's also an issue about ambition and speed. This is a global market right now that is growing rapidly. And if the UK wants to be an export partner in this global market, we will have to have cities who meet these future city discussion and definitions. And I don't know who saw the press yesterday from one of the Conservative ministers who said the whole Climate Change Act needs to change. The decarbonisation of city isn't going to change. It probably has disappeared off the headlines a little bit, but the idea that we can operate cities on today's energy principles is completely illusionary. We're working very closely with a network called C40, which represents the 60, funny isn't it, C40, represents the 60 biggest cities in the world, New York, Tokyo, London, who are completely committed to the idea that they don't just have to live a livable city, they also have that livable city more resilient and decarbonized. All activities are happening within those cities. And there are two new toolkits, or two new things that we can use in getting there. One is about the physical city, and we did a study for Biz on this. It expresses it as about a 400 billion market, where you think about physical infrastructure differently. When you think about physical infrastructure within the city as a system, rather than the individual silos, where currently roads or bridges or water systems are planned. And I'll talk about that in a second. The second new capability that cities have is the idea of a digital economy. We wrote a report called Information Marketplaces a few years ago that showed our principal thinking, and all the research links are at the back of the presentation. I'm sure the organizers will share that with you. But the second bit is the idea that we now have a digital economy emerging in cities that just wasn't available 5 years ago, and that we don't see slowing down at all. There are no queues outside Apple stores for people to return their iPhones. The cost of sensors is coming down to pennies. So the ability to instrument the city will only increase rather than decrease. But let's start with the physical first. I like this picture because it shows ambition. It's also difficult to understand why when you just see the picture. This is Rio after the mayor decided that about 60% of all journeys should be done by public transport. When you have a starting point of about 12%, that's rather a big challenge. So in the first, we call them two-term mayors, in his first term, because politically it's difficult to change everything in one term, he did all the likable activities, increasing public transport, more buses, building trams, educating people on the need of different transport needs. In his second term, he decides to blow up one of the biggest motorways going through Rio as a physical signal that A, I will deal with mobility different in my city, B, I will act on the car and the role of the car in the city, and C, that after I've done that, people will experience a better Rio and then I'll become the president of Brazil. Well, that's his plan for the next stage. I can't comment on that. But these bold plans about the physical city are happening, and they are sort of happening in the UK too. The city in the north is expecting another 200,000 people moving into the city centre, and it's just not prepared for that with its current infrastructure. So 200,000 people who need housing, but who want to have a family, perhaps in the city centre, will also need GP practices and public realm and parks where they can walk around. It needs to be safe, it needs to be well lit. That is a different city centre than most UK city centres currently provide. So how do you make that change? There's no way it will happen through a siloed approach where you plan roads and parks and housing and infrastructure like utilities or energy in isolation from each other. Bristol, with a new mayor and a new chief executive, set out a vision called Social Innovation the Bristol Way. Why are they doing that? It's physically completely reshaping the city centre, again, as a place where people want to live. And the reason is that the university is producing this talent that wants to live in an urban context. They don't want to necessarily live in the countryside. But for that talent to stay there, they have to attract them and decide to stay in Bristol while they move to London or New York. They have three top universities in the area, so the talent is there, they just have to keep them. So for them, the future city's agenda and how they think about infrastructure is to deliver an outcome that will make somebody coming out of university choosing to stay in the city centre of Bristol or Bath or Cardiff as a metro region rather than moving to London. But it's not just the urban elite that will need new infrastructure. If you go into Tottenham and you see a single parent with 3 children not being able to get a job because they have to go shopping twice a day because they don't have a car and they can only carry what they need to buy every day, that is a completely different experience of the city. So the city's agenda will also have to widen and broaden from the rather narrow definition right now of an urban elite to all the people living in cities, because they are all voters. And they will all form an opinion, which I'll come to later, that will affect how mayors will lead cities in the future. And it comes into infrastructure. We can see already a program where 10 million, less dramatic, isn't it, 10,000, 10 million streetlights will all get replaced in the next few years across European cities. And at that point, we face a principal choice. Do we replace a streetlight with LEDs that are just a bit more energy efficient? Or will somebody invest in a completely new sensor and telecoms platform that cities currently don't have, that will give you real-time data on air pollution, on parking spaces, on anything you want to measure street by street in every city in Europe? Which some places is happening at city scale. Hong Kong building new towns, sort of city scale. China announcing 100 smart cities to be built, so you can get the first one wrong. 10 million people doesn't really matter. India followed quickly with another announcement of similar scale. So this market is happening. And these cities will get designed and will get built, but we believe they will be built in this new paradigm. So these projects can no longer be conceived bottom-up, which is the principal fault of the UK industry right now and how the UK approaches cities, where a fear of vision and a fear of strategy, I think, has led many cities to a point where all infrastructure are planned and designed in isolation from each other. It will require top-down vision and leadership, or we will miss out in this market. So housing, transport, social care, health, technology need to be conceived in much more integrated visions and concepts. So the current framework, which is primarily spatial or economic for city planning and design, will have to change. We'll have to accommodate some of these new requirements. Which brings me to the second tool. So this was about the physical city that will change. The second tool that we now have, which is this urban digital economy. These are not people with removing chewing gum and then writing on their iPad how many they have removed. This is the classic San Francisco park example is often cited about parking sensors in the city. It's quite a boring technology project in that sense, that it's just sticking a sensor in a parking space and then giving a driver the information about the availability of the parking space and perhaps to pay for it. But if you go back to the mayor of Rio, he doesn't want to introduce congestion charge systems because they're highly unpopular. But if he had a real-time system where he can have demand and pricing of parking in his entire city, then it becomes quite an interesting innovation. If these sensors also give you the data that explains to you when people start driving around looking for parking spaces, which triggers congestion, you affect infrastructure costs or congestion costs that are enormous in cities. So this idea of data and information becoming a new asset in the functional part of the city, we think has huge potential. And industry has spent millions marketing this in the last few years. Smart cities, digital cities, connected cities, intelligent cities. I'm sure there's another word I haven't remembered. But the market is real. We just haven't got a good word for it right now. So I'm still stuck with Smart Cities Director, which I really can't stand. But the market is real. This is a study we did for Schneider Electric, where we looked at the transport market itself, which was 13 billion of new instrumentation and technology. As an example, Uber, the much hated, well, by taxi driver, much hated service provider, that if you travel in San Francisco, it's an unbelievable experience of quality of service, is growing into now a global business of 3.5 billion within a few years. So this market is real, but it's not just about transport. The BIS study that included waste, energy, water, and assisted living who identified a 40 billion market. The only reason waste is way behind transport isn't because there isn't a need for the technology that we talked about. It's just the market itself is at an earlier adoption stage and doesn't yet see the full instrumentation fund of it. And the reason for this, what seems unstoppable digitization or this unstoppable idea of a digital urban economy, is that the technology is maturing to a point where we can now check, act, and compare everything. It's quite an interesting concept. I'll have a project later to show this is actually real. The notion that you can check, act, and compare everything is actually quite a new concept. Because only a few years ago, people said that is absolutely ridiculous. We need to agree first what we measure, when we measure, how we measure it. That is no longer the case when a sensor costs pennies, communication is almost free, and the cloud gives us the storage and the ability to manipulate data as a fluid resource. This technological change, together with the population growth and the demographic changes that we see in cities, creates a sort of a perfect environment in which a consumer is also expecting a very different experience. And I agree with the Haditzi on the navigation of the experience, but that's only one part. The navigation of the city is only one part, again, of the functional experience of the city that will change. And again, decarbonizing and creating more resilience will be part of this new vision too. At the heart of it is that we're starting to understand a different way of thinking of information value chain in cities. I'll go through quite quickly, it's quite difficult to understand this slide, but the idea in the past was that public transport mode creates data that drives operation and the experience of the traveler. This is now completely different. Public transport creates data, but the citizen with their smartphone create data all the time. The mobile networks, the physical areas itself, or the maps are available, all create data continually, which aggregates into completely new services and products around the running and the use of the city. And this is a fundamentally different concept on how information will be used in cities. And there is huge market potential in monetizing that if you fully understand it. So with that in mind, we can see a future where mobility is no longer based on the asset you own, a ticket for TfL or a car that you drive, but where mobility is a genuine service where you use a big car during the holiday, use no car for most of the time, you might use a bicycle that you rent, and the mobility becomes a service in the city that will change industries, car industries, public transport industries, public realm design, and at the heart of it will be these new information value chains. But also environmentally, Australia had a few years ago identified that water is probably a resource they need to treat slightly differently. And you can put leak detection into pipes, you can do all sorts of things. But if you cannot change the consumer's perception or the consumer's understanding on how they consume water, you cannot change the system. So there they use this new technology to give the household actual consumption data and then run sophisticated programs around behavior change and awareness raising about the role of water in the Australian economy. Again, that would have been inconceivable 5 or 10 years ago with technology we had available. Or would have been leaflets. That you get through your doorsteps and you look at the leaflets and you say, yes, I'm not interested, and you put it away. Now we're looking at schools getting real-time data from their own street about energy or water use. The kids talk about it when your own children come home and they start to tell you how you should really behave. You probably take note of that at some point. Streetlights already mentioned, control rooms will change. I'll skip through this a little bit because I want to get to the notion that what we talked about so far was either functional or environmental change in cities. But the real driver is starting to open up now. And that is the idea of a digital economy being much broader than just the functional areas like transport and water. And the big drivers now that we're seeing is A, the economic potential. So Hong Kong's GDP in the ICT sector is 6%, and they're realizing that's probably not the right percentage. Canary Wharf, with the Wood Wharf development, will double the size of Canary Wharf, and I don't think they want to have the entire tenancy based on more financial services organizations after what we've been through. So the digital economy is a logical place to go. It was the only economy in London that didn't shrink during the recession. It didn't grow, but it didn't shrink either, according to an LSE study. So the economic potential of having a digital economy led by a mayor or a chief executive or whatever political structure you work in, we think will be one of the top drivers in the smart city agenda. The second will be the political dimension. When every citizen walks around with a phone, like in Hong Kong, we currently have 12 measuring stations that are approved for air quality. So the Secretary for the Environment feels quite confident that he can demonstrate Hong Kong has a very good air quality standard because he chooses where those measuring stations go. Similar things happen in London where we have about 130 measuring points, but owned by different stakeholders. So the Met Office only has control of a few of them. When every citizen with their mobile phone walks around and wants to make a point and holds his phone next to a bus diesel exhaust and says the particle level in Regent Street is unacceptable, that information will run through your city like wildfire if they measure something that resonates with the truth. And we saw it in the riots that started in Tottenham, where technology is now becoming a political instrument, a platform which either political leaders understand or will have big problems. Rio, again, the mayor, calls this a terrible word. Sorry. Polis digitocracy. I mean, at least I'm not director of Polis digitocracy yet. But the idea that Polis, the city, that digital and the democracy are now becoming probably the second biggest driver for the smart city agenda, I think is real. The very good book written by the previous mayor of San Francisco, Gavin Newsom, where he addresses this point too. The third area that's growing rapidly in the smart city agenda, which I think has huge investment potential again, is the social and care challenge of cities. The biggest threat to cities' budgets right now isn't necessarily transport, but it's the idea of demographic change and an aging population radically needing a different experience to be able to live in the city without having to move into a hospital for every little illness that they have. I'll run through it quickly. I know the organisers will get nervous for time. This is an example. Christchurch, New Zealand, after an earthquake. 40 billion budget to rebuild the entire business district that was destroyed in an earthquake. is now setting out to check, act and compare everything, deploy state-of-the-art technology, and then export what they've learned there to China and India as major growth markets for this new industry. At the heart of it, we think there will not be the individual project, the smart mobility, the control rooms, the low-carbon systems, where people, industry will make the money. At the heart of, for us as the UK, will be the ability to replace that box where a miracle occurs with an idea of vision and leadership around how we want UK cities to function in the future, both as a new physical city is physically conceived differently, but also that has proper political mandate and strategy for the digital economy. And the region of that, I think some of the other speakers said earlier, is the issue of trust. I think that is the single biggest threat to the smart cities agenda, because when all information is available, you really want to think about quite carefully what you make public about your own life, because currently the notion is that none of that data belongs to you, that all of the data belongs to somebody else, but not you, the person who actually is the citizen or who created the data in the first place. Thank you.